Send your scariest workplace stories to us at eeriecast.com/submit and rate and review Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Late nights at the office will never be the same again after you hear these stories. Ghostly tricksters, psychotic stalkers, and demons in windows. Yep, ain't no amount of Dead and Roasted double espresso gonna keep you sane through this kind of chaos. Let me just clock out real quick, and we can chill out with these terrifying and allegedly true office stories and more. These are Tales from the Break Room. Shape. From Casket. I'll start this story by saying I wasn't a believer in anything paranormal before this night. But after you learn what happened to me, it made me believe just a little bit more. I was working late one night at my office during Christmas time. We had some rush orders due, and I'm the only one at the office without any obligation to family, so they just kind of stuck me with it. I'm complaining too much about it though, because it does get me some extra money for doing pretty much nothing. I'm trying to get the work done as fast as I can though, so I can just go home and do even more nothing with my cats. But things just aren't going the way I want them to. The weather keeps knocking out the power, so I keep having to restart my computer every 15 minutes or so. Then, without fail, the power goes out again. So I start to walk around the empty office, peeking into people's rooms. Everyone else has already gone home for holidays hours ago. I get to the boss's office and start to snoop around his desk. Unlike everyone else in the office, the boss has a giant window to look out of. I looked out that window, and I saw a figure standing down on the sidewalk next to the bench for the bus stop. Even standing right under the light, they're hardly illuminated by it. I can't make them out clearly, but I can only assume they're a homeless person or something like that, because there aren't any buses running at this time. I continue to watch them, and I notice that the figure does not move at all. I started to move away from the window then, and that's when it happens. The figure finally moves, coming towards the building. This startled me, because I'd been watching them for at least 20 minutes, and they hadn't moved a muscle. Then, all of a sudden, the figure begins to speed walk towards the building, before switching into a full-on sprint. I turn and run back to my office, grabbing my stuff and running towards the elevator. But when I get there, the elevator was already coming up. My stomach dropped. Who could be coming up right now? I should be the only one in the office, right? The elevator gets closer and closer to my floor, and I still have no idea who or what is about to get off. The number hits my floor and my heart sinks. The doors slowly open, and I brace myself for anything but... It's empty. But how is that possible? Someone had to have pushed the button specifically to go to this floor, and yet no one was inside. I get on the elevator, taking it all the way down. Once I get to the bottom floor, I look around to see if I can find that figure, but they've completely disappeared. I walk out the door to the spot where I initially saw them. When I get to the spot under the light, next to the bench where the figure had been standing, there's a noticeable difference in temperature. I then look up to the office window where I had been standing, watching the figure, and right there in the window stood the same dark figure, looking right down at me. I was awestruck by the sight of it. How is that possible? How did this person sneak by me so easily? Who could be in the office right now? I was the only one there that night. None of this made sense. I start to walk back to the office building, but I notice the figure doesn't move. So I start to run to see if I can catch whoever's in there. I run to the elevator, hitting the button to go up to my floor, but it's taking a long time to come down. After what feels like ages, it eventually gets there. I get on, and I hit the number to my floor. But just before the doors closed, I noticed I had dropped my key card that would get me into the actual office on the floor. So I stepped off and the doors closed behind me, the elevator going back up. Not wanting to waste any more time, I took the stairs. Once I get to my floor, I run to my boss's office. There's no one there, no one by the window, but there was a noticeable difference in temperature. I go to the window and look out to the street. Once again, that figure was standing next to the bench by the light. I decide maybe these late nights are finally catching up to me. Maybe it's time to go home, because I have no idea what's going on. How did this person keep switching places with me? Was it even a person? The streetlight began to flicker before turning off. Then it turns back on after a few moments, and when it does, the figure is no longer there. That was the final straw. I walked into my office and packed up my things, leaving for the night. When I get back home, I feel like there's some sort of presence there, a kind of heaviness. Walking inside, I try to turn the hall lights on, but they don't work. But I see that the light is still on at the stove, so I assume that the power isn't out. I walk into the kitchen, trying to turn on the light there, but nothing happens. That's when I begin to hear sounds coming from my bedroom. I walk over to my door, grabbing the handle. It's freezing cold. I try to open the door, but it doesn't budge. I let go of the handle, and I go to push on the door itself, but before I do, it starts to open slowly on its own. Standing right on the other side is the figure. I can't make out who they are. They were practically cloaked in shadow. The figure takes a step towards me and reaches out before just disappearing. And the moment it does, all the lights in my house just turn back on. I can't explain what just happened to me. If it's my sleep-deprived, overworked brain or something else. But all I can say is that it really freaked me out. I've heard of shadow people before, but this seemed much more sinister. Cigarette butts. From Rubyfollower. I used to work a lot of overtime at my customer service call center job, when that health insurance company was launching some new confusing product. My shift ended at about 11 p.m., but that night in particular, my boss bribed us with more overtime to stay past midnight when call volume was high from overwhelmed policyholders. The extra cash seemed decent enough for me to stick around way later than normal, dealing with these aggravated callers into the wee hours. By 2 a.m., the calls died down, and so had the number of employees left on the floor. It felt kind of creepy to me, being there that late, with most of the desks dark around the huge circular room. I chugged some old vending machine coffee, trying to sound half alive for any poor insomniacs calling in. About 10 minutes later, when my line rang, I automatically opened with our upbeat greeting. "Thank you for calling, this is..." But static cut me off, followed by weird amplified breathing noises. I wondered if somebody's grandpa had butt dialed me after falling asleep with his cell phone on. The ragged inhaling got louder in my ear real fast. I'm going to hang up if no one needs help." The heavy breathing just continued, reminding me of obscene prank calls as a teen. After a few more awkward seconds listening to this wheezing, I disconnected the call, feeling a bit taken aback. Maybe 5 minutes later, my direct line rang again. Still braced from the creepy call, I hesitantly picked up. Once more, I immediately heard rough, magnified breathing echoing from my receiver. At that point, I said forget overtime and slammed down hard. My hands felt clammy thinking about some total perv tracking my new extension. I stood up, needing some fresh air to settle down after those freaky calls. I felt relieved when the elevator arrived quickly, since the huge, shadowy call room gave me the heebie-jeebies. But I totally tensed up again, alone inside, when the light suddenly died completely for several seconds. I almost shrieked, imagining getting trapped in a pitch-dark elevator. But luckily, after a few seconds, the lights came back on. The moment those doors slid open on the ground floor, I hustled outside. I made a beeline past the main lobby guard, who was reading a novel at his little round desk. Out the side doors, there was a small outdoor sitting area, edged by some scraggly trees and bushes, where employees could smoke. Even just breathing cold night air chilled me out a bit, and firing up a cigarette helped calm my jumpiness even more. But then some small movement way back in the trees snagged my eye. I squinted hard at the gloomy pines about 30 yards off behind the smokers area. For a second, I swore I'd spotted a darker, tall silhouette lurking amongst those thick trees. As I smoked, I could feel my spine prickling, like someone was facing me, hidden just out of view at the wood's edge. Even my cigarette cherry seemed to glow unnaturally bright. I could just feel eyes staring at me through the nearby branches. Then, a loud crack echoed from the dark tree line. I panicked, thinking that shady figure was moving closer. Frantically, I ground out half my smoke and scrambled back inside to the front desk. The guard politely listened to my freaked-out rambling about the potential lurker I'd glimpsed outside. His patrol radio crackled with indistinct, overlapping chatter as he contacted campus security to sweep the area. A minute or two later, apparently they had found no trespassers. I went back up, feeling a bit more safe at my workstation. Though it took everything I had not to just walk out before my shift officially ended. But I stuck it out for that overtime pay. Then, 20 minutes later, when my desk phone shrieked alive, I heard that exact, ghastly, amplified wheezing from before. Before I could curse them out, and believe me, I was about to, a rough, low voice cut through the static.
Smoking kills.
I froze in horror, before eventually slamming down the receiver hard enough to scatter pins off my desk. Some sort of creep had been watching me. Grabbing my bag with shaking hands, I speed-walked to the elevator and went down to the main lobby. I practically begged the guard to accompany me to my car as I explained the back-to-back stalker calls. He seemed concerned, so he agreed, picking up his two-way to let the other guards know what he was about to do. We approached my Volkswagen Bug in the massive concrete garage. Once I was safely at my car, I profusely thanked the guard, who nodded and smiled before walking back to the main lobby. I was shaking so bad, I fumbled my keys, nearly dropping them as I unlocked the door. When I'd opened the door fully, the overhead bulb came on, revealing hundreds of smoked cigarette butts and ashes completely carpeting the seats and dashboard. Dumbstruck, for a few seconds, I gagged at the overpowering stench of old tobacco. Maybe it was the stress and disgust, but the rest of the night was a blur. I reported everything to the security guard, and I remember them searching again, but not finding any trespassers. No trace of a stalker. And you want to know something really funny? I quit smoking after this. So maybe horror is a great motivator. My 2 godmothers' creepy and terrifying experiences at work. From Cricket Girl 20. I have 2 godmothers, Angela and Lori. When they told me these stories, I felt bad that they had to go through them. This first story comes from Lori. She worked at the same youth shelter I worked at, but started there after I left. One night during the 3rd month there, she was in the office with DeAndre and a new staff member, who DeAndre was training. The new staff member went to the staff bathroom at one point, when suddenly she came back, running into the office. She grabbed her things and said, "I can't work here." Of course, Lori asked why. Frantically, she explained, "As I was using the bathroom, the hanger on the doorknob started to spin by itself." Then she left. No one heard from her again. A week later, Lori was working the night shift alone. While she was in the office, her service dog Winston perks his ears and growls. Winston is normally a quiet dog, so when he started to growl, Lori got concerned. She looked at the cameras and saw nothing, but knew Winston had sensed something. The youth shelter had started an independent living program, and Lori would work there sometimes. The apartments in the program were fairly nice. One night, while Lori and Winston were in the apartment they used as the program office, she suddenly heard a strange noise. She said it sounded like someone wailing and howling. She said Winston went crazy. She had to double-check to make sure the door was locked. Lori no longer works for the shelter, but she says it was one of the best jobs she ever had. She loved working with the youth. This next story comes from Angela. I was with her for a few of these incidents. She worked at the apartments and said a few crazy things happened to her. During her 3rd month working for the program, she was doing apartment checks. When she went into one of the vacant program apartments, she heard someone in one of the bedrooms. So she grabbed a 2x4 that was by the door. As soon as she opened the bedroom door, she saw someone climbing out the window. The way she described it is quite funny. She said the person was in such a rush to get away, they dropped half their nuggets and fries. So Angela started to bring a bat whenever she worked the night shift. About a month after that, she was in the office when a man knocked on the door and asked, "Could I sleep in here?" Angela told him no, but then he offered her a good time if she let him sleep there. She once again told him no and closed the door. Later that day, she called me, asking me to come keep her company until her shift was done at midnight. At around 8 p.m., we were just hanging out in the office when the office door opened suddenly, making us both jump. One of the non-program residents walked in. This upset me, so I spoke up. "First of all, you can't just walk in here like you own the place." Angela had to calm me down. Later, when I walked Angela to her car, a man came running from in front of her car so fast, I guess he thought he was Usain Bolt, a homeless or a vagrant of some sort. Angela waved goodbye to me as I waited for my friend to come pick me up. Later on, as Angela worked there, one of the non-program residents started to try to make advances towards her, even though she was a married woman. She had made that fact very clear, showing him her wedding ring, but he wasn't fazed by it. When she described him to me, I knew who she was talking about, as I had run into him a couple of times when visiting the program. I brought her lunch one day and hung out with her in the office. I was standing by the door when it opened, and he was standing outside. He looked at Angela and said in a creepy way, "Oh, I just wanted to make sure you had dinner. I can fix you dinner if you like." Angela looked at me, and I turned towards the man, saying, "She's married. She doesn't like you, so please leave her alone." He slowly closed the door, and I locked it. He never bothered her again. When we told Lori about it, she said, "Oh, I had a run-in with him. I was taking Winston outside, and he walked down the stairs telling me, 'It's too late for a beautiful woman to be outside by herself.' He took a step towards me, but Winston growled at him. Come to find out, he had actually made advances on every female staff member, all of whom were married or had partners. Angela decided to carry pepper spray with her from there on out. Now, this next incident wasn't creepy, but just downright made everyone jump. The air repairman was working on the air conditioner. I had just walked in bringing some treats for the program residents when we heard a loud crash. Everyone jumped up a few inches. Turns out a mouse scurried out of the vent, scaring the man so bad he fell off the ladder. Luckily, he was okay and didn't break anything. A few weeks later, I was once again with Angela to keep her company until her shift was done at midnight. Now, I don't know if we were just on edge, but we were watching dead silence when the air kicked on, causing one of the doors to one of the rooms to swing open because it hadn't been latched all the way. We jumped, only to have the office door open, which was the midnight staff showing up. Guess we were so caught up in the movie we didn't notice it was already midnight. Not long after that, Angela quit. She was in the office when one of the program residents walked in and asked if he could go to the store. Curfew on weekdays was 10:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. on weekends. This was a weeknight, and Angela had to tell him no. That's when he got hostile and lunged at her to attack her. Luckily, one of the male staff members showed up, tackling the resident to the ground. The resident was released from the program, and Angela quit at the end of the week. I honestly don't blame her. Nowadays, she works as a therapist, and Lori works as a nurse, though they do have some scary stories from their new jobs as well. Late night at the park. From 1314 Recon. I was staying late at the ranger station that night in the summer of 2003, trying to finish up a report on the recent wasting disease cases we'd found in some of the deer. Now, the cases were quite interesting and eerie, but the report itself was boring. And honestly, I was just itching to get out of there and go home. As I typed away, I glanced out the window. It was getting dark fast. The sky was already turning a dusky purple gray. I was so focused on completing the report, I didn't even hear the first tap on the glass. The second one made me nearly jump out of my seat. I looked over at the office window, surprised to see a woman standing there, looking out at the woods behind the station. Her back was to me, so I couldn't see her face. My first thought was that she might be lost or in some kind of trouble to have wandered this deep into the park alone at dusk. I went over and tapped on the glass to get her attention. "Ma'am?" I called out. "Can I help you with something?" She didn't turn around. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded strange and flat. "Please, let me in," she said. She raised her arm limply, pointing in the direction of the station door. Suddenly, a chill went down my spine. I wasn't sure why, exactly. Maybe the way she said it was so lifeless and strange. It made me hesitate for a moment. "Are you okay, ma'am?" I asked gently. "Did you lose your way out there?" For some reason, I couldn't bring myself to open the window or to head over to the door to begin to let her in. "Please, let me in," she said. She repeated in the same empty tone as before. It wasn't even like she had said it again. Rather, it was like a recording being replayed. And still, she faced away from me. The fear swirling in my gut grew stronger. Something definitely wasn't right here. I backed up, quickly going around the small building, checking all the doors and windows to make sure they were locked. Then I went back to the office, closing the office door firmly and locking it, just in case. Maybe this woman was on drugs or dangerously mentally ill. Either way, being alone out here with her made me feel unsafe. Back safe in the office, I slowly turned around to face the window. But now there was no one there. She had simply vanished inexplicably into the deepening dusk. I radioed the situation to Pete, the other ranger on duty that night. He said he would swing by to check things out and keep an eye out for her. But I told him not to worry too much. Though I was pretty freaked out, it was likely some confused woman who wandered off the trails. Still, I had this ominous feeling. I couldn't shake it. I chalked it up to working too late and being tired. About 10 minutes went by as I tried to focus on my reports again, when I heard another tap on the glass. Dread filled my heart, and I whirled around. There she was again, back at the same window, except now she was facing me and staring right at me. I couldn't breathe. Her eyes were jet black, reflecting no light whatsoever. And in place of a mouth, there was nothing. Just smooth skin. How was she able to speak before? I wondered. My heart pounded painfully as we locked eyes. As I clumsily backed away, I hit my leg hard at the corner of the desk, causing me to fall over. In a panic, I quickly regained my footing, standing up and facing the window, and now she was gone. I had no idea what I'd just seen, what I'd encountered. Some demon or spirit of the forest. I suddenly felt very unsafe being in that isolated station, all by myself. Nothing but wooden walls separating me from that if it decided to come back. I made the choice to pack it up and head home for the night, even though it meant leaving that report unfinished. I walked briskly to my truck, covered in goosebumps. I kept glancing around for any sign of that strange woman. Thankfully, the darkness revealed nothing. Over the next few nights, I had trouble sleeping. I kept having these nervous dreams filled with her empty black eyes and mouthless face. Eventually, they faded, and I convinced myself it must have been some elaborate prank. Maybe I was more tired than I realized. Still, the day after the incident, I included her in my report for the day. Never did see hide nor hair of her again. Sometimes I wonder if it even really happened, or if it was all just my overactive imagination getting away from me out there alone in the woods. Either way, I now make sure to finish up my work and clear out before dusk whenever I have to work late, just to be completely safe. And that window, whenever I'm on duty, stays permanently closed with the curtains drawn. The Mounds. From Bekka. Dog walking is pretty easy money, especially in our neighborhood where everyone seems to have some kind of fancy purebred. Quick note, I'll be using fake names for the people and dogs in this story for privacy reasons. The owners of these dogs post them all over social media, and giving out their names would be a dead giveaway. I watch the Hall's two corgis, Ein and Cornelius, every Thursday evening when the family goes out to dinner. Honestly, the $20 a night is mostly payment for me having to deal with Ein's grumpy, nippy butt. That dog does not like me. But what can I say? Money is money when you're 17. Last Thursday, I showed up at 6:30 as usual. Mrs. Hall ran me through everything as she attempted to wrangle a wildly wiggly Cornelius and get her earrings in at the same time. They already went potty, but Ein probably has to go again. He always does. Just lock them in the garage when you bring them home. Food and water bowls are already full. We'll be back around 9. I clipped their leashes on and headed out the door, with leash-dragging Ein in the lead, looking back at me balefully every few steps. Our neighborhood is pretty nice, but there's been a ton of new construction as of late. Whole patches of skeleton houses and dug-up lots along the main road. We passed a few finished but empty homes and made our way toward an open field they'd been using to dump piles of dirt, dug up from foundations. I call the place the Mounds, and usually take the dogs there at the halfway point, since it's quiet and empty. When we got within sight of the Mounds, Ein and Cornelius fell quiet, their ears perking up. Now, they do sometimes do this when they catch a weird scent or spot a neighborhood cat prowling around. I kept walking, giving a little tug on their leashes. Come on, boys. Go potty, so we can get back home. But when we reached the edge of the Mounds, instead of wandering off to sniff and mark their territory like usual, both corgis ran right up next to me with their tails tucked. Ein leaned into my legs, letting out these little stressed whines, while Cornelius stared at one of the larger mounds, statue still. Confused, I looked over in that direction too, squinting in the dim light of the safety lamp mounted on a pole nearby. I couldn't see anything out of the ordinary at first, but then I noticed movement. There was something at the top of that mound. A figure crouched down like it was trying to stay hidden. I froze, straining to understand what I was seeing. It looked like a man, almost, but very skinny, limbs too long, too spindly, with hairless pitch-black skin that seemed to absorb any faint light rather than reflect it. Even crouched, it was pretty big. I could tell it was probably as tall as a grown man, at least. My breath caught in my throat when I realized its head was tilted in our direction. It was watching us. My instincts screamed at me to run, but some deeper primal voice told me, no, don't let it know that you can see it. So, for that moment, I stood absolutely still, heart hammering, keeping my eyes carefully unfocused. I was still looking, but trying not to really look, if that makes sense. Ein whined again, louder, and that spurred me into action. I dragged my gaze away nonchalantly, giving the leashes a sharp tug towards home, keeping my voice low and even. Okay, boys, fun's over. Let's head back. They eagerly complied, galloping alongside me while I tried not to obviously sprint in panic. I felt an itch between my shoulder blades, like I was being watched as we retreated down the street. Somehow I just knew that making eye contact had been dangerous. If I had let it know that I had seen it, if it realized I was aware of it, something terrible would have happened to all three of us. I decided to take the corgis back to my place. It was closer, and it felt safer. As soon as we got inside, I locked the door behind us, shoving a squeaky, clueless Cornelius off of me. I pulled out my phone with trembling hands, calling my dad and blurting out the story before he could even say hello. As I talked, I kept glancing out the front window, even though that creature had been a good 4 blocks away. Eventually, Dad got me to slow down, and I told him steadily and exactly where I'd seen the thing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long minute. Then he told me to stay put, stay inside, and keep the doors locked. He said he was on his way home, and he would stop by the Mounds to check it out himself. I paced the house anxiously until he finally got home about 20 minutes later. I'd spent the entire time watching the clock and peering out into the dark. When Dad showed up, he looked grim. waving off my barrage of questions about what he saw at first. But I wouldn't let it go until he finally sat me down, his face pale. "I didn't see anything, Bekka," he admitted. "No tracks either, nothing disturbed." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "But when I walked over there, I suddenly got scared, really unsettled, like I needed to leave the area immediately. Honestly, I can't explain it, and I've never felt like that before." I shivered. What if it's still there? What do you think it was? Dad shook his head firmly. "It doesn't matter now. I don't want you walking near that site anymore, understand? I would prefer you to take the long way around the block from now on to walk the dogs." His tone made it clear this wasn't up for debate. After the sit-down conversation, he drove me and the corgis in his car over to the halls, locking up Ein and Cornelius in the garage for the night, as requested. We double-checked that everything was locked as it should be, making sure the dogs would be completely safe. After that, we drove home. Part of me wonders if he had seen something after all. It seemed like he was hiding the full truth from me, which would make sense since he wouldn't want me to be too scared. I've stuck to our agreement, though. I've avoided the Mounds at night ever since, taking the dogs on a winding loop well away from there during my evening walks. Maybe it's nothing. My imagination combined with some weird animal that belongs in the woods, not a construction site. That's what I tell myself anyway, whenever my mind wanders back to that night, to the lanky, shadowy figure that watched me from the darkness. Somehow, I'm still sure that making eye contact, really seeing it, would have ended very badly for me and the dogs. I have no idea what it was, but I know that much is true, so I make sure not to look for it anymore, just in case. Faint Bernard and the Warbling Man, from X99X. I've been walking dogs on weekends for extra money since starting college a few years back. It helps pay for books, food, all that. I mostly just walk neighborhood dogs around the suburbs, but old Mrs. Winters has me hike trails with her sweet St. Bernard, Bella. We'll amble through the woods to the park and back. Takes about an hour usually. Last Saturday, I headed over around 6 p.m. to get Bella, like normal. She greeted me with her usual sloppy kisses before we hooked up her leash and headed out. The trail starts just behind Mrs. Winters' cul-de-sac. It winds through sparse woods and gets pretty dark once the sun starts going down. We were about halfway back on the trail after looping the park when Bella just collapsed without warning. She whimpered, and her legs completely buckled, sending her huge body toppling over. I panicked, kneeling next to her giant head, frantically feeling for a heartbeat. Under all that fur and fat, I finally found one. Thready, but steady. Her breathing seemed normal enough too, but her eyes were closed. She was out cold. I had no idea what to do with an unconscious 170-pound dog in the middle of the woods at dusk. As I fished my phone out of my pocket to call Mrs. Winters to let her know what happened, a voice behind me asked,
"Can you help me?"
I turned around, expecting to see a runner who could help me rouse Bella, but I almost dropped my phone when I saw the owner of the voice. He was impossibly tall and thin, about 7 feet, wearing an actual honest-to-God trench coat and top hat. He looked so out of place. Between the shadows and hat, I couldn't see his face at all. Before I could say anything, he asked something else, voice strangely warbled.
"Does your flesh feel heavy?"
What? I stammered, shrinking away instinctively. Look, man, my dog.
I'm very hungry.
He interrupted, the warp in his voice intensifying.
Can you help me?
He moved forward then, not a step. There was no jounce in his body, like a typical step would cause. Instead, it was like he slid forward on a conveyor belt. Pure primal fear jolted through me. I knew implicitly that if I didn't get away from this freak right now, I was dead. I then heard something else coming up. Jogging footsteps, approaching. I nearly wept in relief. The steps were coming from behind me. I turned to glance, seeing a blonde woman with earbuds in. Realizing I'd taken my eyes off of this terrifying figure, I turned back. But the moment the woman appeared, apparently the towering guy with the trench coat had simply vanished. No footsteps, nothing, like he had never existed. The woman slowed to a walk and looked from me to Bella, who was sprawled limply in the leaves. She pulled out an earbud. "Whoa, your dog okay?" She panted. Before I could explain a thing, Bella suddenly lifted her giant head with a snort. Her tail wagged lazily when she spotted the newcomer. The jogger helped me get the dopey St. Bernard to her feet. Aside from a bit of dribble, Bella seemed utterly normal. Thank God. The jogger kept peering into the woods nearby, after I profusely thanked her for stopping and helping. It was like she sensed something was off. "It's getting dark," she muttered, before replacing her earbud and continuing down the trail, throwing puzzled glances back at me, clinging desperately to Bella's collar. The rest of the walk home remains a blur. As soon as Bella was inside with a confused Mrs. Winters, I raced back to my dorm at a dead sprint, triple-checking my lock and sitting there, shaking on the couch. I don't know exactly what I encountered on that trail while Bella lay unconscious. It looked like a person, sure, but I know it wasn't. The entire time I talked with that man, my animal instincts screamed predator. Every ounce of my being vibrated with certainty that if the jogger hadn't showed up precisely when she did, I doubt I would be here to tell anyone about the hungry thing in the trench coat. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't natural. It didn't belong there. And I know it was that thing that caused Bella to collapse somehow. It wanted me alone, but for what twisted purpose I can't even imagine. I swear its presence leached all warmth from the air. Just being near it was wrong, like a black hole where life can't exist. Maybe I imagined things after the shock of Bella fainting unexpectedly, but I highly doubt it. These days, I don't take the back trails anymore. I haven't walked Bella since it happened. I do miss her. I wish I could forget that hungry, warped voice asking for help that I know I couldn't give him, not willingly. Vowing to never forget feels melodramatic, but I know for dang sure that thing will kill me if it found me again, alone in the woods at night. The Hellhound. From Marshall's Skeleton. I signed up for a dog walking app, thinking it would be a good way to make some extra cash. After a quick quiz on canine knowledge and a brief training video, I began. I'd been a dog walker for several years without any issues, picking up their messes along the way. But then I met the Hellhound. He was by far the most poorly behaved dog I ever met. The Hellhound was practically a monster. I always loved dogs, and I believed myself to be experienced with them. I'd even owned my own dogs all my life, from the moment I left the cradle. As a toddler, we had a fluffy white Maltese. I would be sprawled out on the living room carpet, playing with the Maltese, who looked like a luxury rug. I grew up playing with dogs and adoring their wagging tails and goofy, slobbering loyalty. But you could hardly consider the hellhound a dog. Why someone had bothered to register a feral escaped Canadian timber wolf on the dog walking app was beyond me, because that's what it looked like and acted like. When I looked at the dog and the master's profile on the app, both appeared tame. The dog, who looked like a friendly blue-eyed husky, was photographed curled up on a couch. The dog's owner wore an innocuous baseball cap and a friendly smile. The owner listed the dog breed as Wolf Hybrid. Could just as well have removed the hybrid part and written Untamed Wolf on the dog walking app. But then no one but a sucker would have gone for the job. And yet the sucker that did go for it was me. I agreed to walk the dog because it was near Christmas holidays, and I needed extra money to buy gifts. I drove to the pet parent's home without bothering to check the weather beforehand. I had mistakenly driven into a full-on blizzard. Perfect for escaped Canadian timber wolves, of course, but an awful day for driving. I saw several accidents and cars which had slid off the road, and flashing lights on my way to the dog's home. The snow continued to fall heavily as I heard a radio report, saying something along the lines of, "If at all possible, stay in your homes." Well, too late for me. When I arrived at the evil doggo's home, a pale yellow apartment building with small patches of lawn out front, the hair on my neck immediately stood up. I had just seen a police officer leave Unit 9, the unit next door to Unit 8, which the app listed as the home of the wolf hybrid I was supposed to walk. I tried to calm down, giving myself a pep talk, telling myself at least the police officer had left the unit next door to the wolf hybrid, and not the actual unit I was meant to be at. I had dressed the part, wearing sturdy sneakers and carrying a bag of doggy treats. I tried to tell myself I was prepared. If anything happened to me, I could always call the dog walking company or 911, right? Surely they had insurance. Then I remembered the words of my brother from the night before. He was amazed I would be walking such a dog. Be careful with those wolf hybrids. They're part wild. I tried to reassure myself that I would be careful. With newly instilled confidence, I knocked on the door of Unit 8. Immediately, I heard loud barking and things slamming about, as if a 300-pound monster was trying to knock down the door. Shaking with nerves, I checked the app, and I saw that the dog owner would not be home. The instructions had been updated. At work, the key's under the rug. Well then, if anything went wrong, there would be nothing and no one home to save me from a blinding blizzard and a wolf attack. I did everything I'd been trained for. Upon opening the door, I offered the aggressive and snarling wolf-like creature a dog treat. And when I did, my arm almost got bitten off. In fact, the way the dog snapped at me left a small puncture on my finger, and I was bleeding. I grimaced and glanced back at the instructions on the app as the beast jumped up on me with its heavy paws on my chest, almost knocking me to the floor. I'm a slight woman, standing at 5'4", and this nearly caused me to fall over. The leash is on the banister. The instructions read. I knew it would be difficult to make it even a few steps over to the banister, with this wolf dog's heavy claws on my chest, much less manage the beast at all. After several minutes of a struggle, which was probably a markdown on the app for wasting customer time, I managed to clip the leash to the werewolf's collar. Large jaws snapped and dripped, and the creature tugged so hard at the leash that I went flying into the apartment's wall, which was probably another markdown on the app, if the owner found out about it. The wolf and I never managed to get very far, once out in that freezing blizzard. I stumbled around in the blinding snow with the beast. I tried to go as far into the half-hour walk that was required as possible, but mostly we made useless circles around the apartment's driveway, which I'm sure looked like someone was trying to fend off an attacker. The app tracked our walk through GPS, so I tried to make it appear to the company as if I were walking more by making more circles around the driveway and apartment's small lawn. Once I even dared to try to make it to the Catholic church across the street from the apartment. That was a big mistake. The hellhound used the opportunity to break free from the leash, nearly ripping my arm out of its socket in the process. The worst part was that the hellhound seemed to think this was all a game, and when I begged him to come back, tugging at the leash I managed to grab a hold of, he tugged back so hard, I felt a pain in my arm, which then went numb, flapping in the breeze like a piece of salami. Fight back, I thought. You're not gonna die today. I tried to go to a mental space to block out the pain in my now dangling wrist. But that hellhound had no fear, and that was the problem. It was around then the dog owner sent a message from his office. Is everything all right? The beast tugged at me so hard I barely managed to text back. Everything's great, I lied. What I really wanted to say back was, call the police and an ambulance, but I didn't. I checked the time. I had somehow managed to hold on to that hellhound's leash for 28 minutes, so I then decided to return the Hound, then hang out in the lot for the remaining 2 minutes, turning him in a bit early. Night-night, doggy, I thought. This dog was defective, and I had to send him back. But that was a challenge too. Until suddenly, the canine decided to drag me home, and surprisingly, he looked glad to be back. But then he looked at me with a sad-eyed puppy dog look, as if to say, it's okay, I understand. Nobody else likes walking me either. See ya, I screamed and slammed the door, running to my car to book it out of there, never to return to the house with the hellhound. Was the risk really worth the low pay and torture anyway? It's been a while since I've booked a walk on the dog walking app. I really wish that pet parents would state the truth when they ask people to walk their werewolves. Doggone. From Firefly. I'm a professional dog walker in the Colorado Springs area. For privacy purposes, I will keep my name out of this, but you can just call me Firefly. I often walk dogs around Freedom Park. It's a large park in the middle of the city. It's always been a large attraction because it's pet-friendly and often has good food vans. I was to pick up a new client's dog that day, a friendly husky with brown eyes, a really beautiful animal. It was on a side of town I wasn't familiar with, so the client said I could be a few minutes late, as his address was quite out of the way. I climbed into my silver Ford and began the long 30-minute drive. I made it to that side of town, and it was a bit run down. The road was full of potholes, both filled and not. The asphalt had clearly seen better days, as they just filled the cracks with tar. It was completely dead, despite being a bit past noon on a Tuesday. I had stopped by McDonald's, happily munching on some fries while waiting for the stoplight to turn. I saw a homeless man then, standing at the stoplight with a sign. I decided to give him some money on the way back through when I picked up the dog. I moved through the streets until I reached a really rough spot of town, where everyone hosted a single unifying color. It was gangland, so I held my head down as I drove, trying to refrain from eye contact. I looked in my mirror at a stop sign, seeing a black Benz behind me, which was obviously out of place. I looked to the GPS. 10 minutes until I got to the residence, and I was honestly second-guessing if 20 an hour was worth it. I kept going down the roads, the street gradually smoothing out from where even the tar they used had worn away. The stop signs had been spray-painted, and there were more people walking along the sidewalk. The buildings hosted a creative amount of graffiti, too. I frowned heavily, knowing that I probably should leave at that point, but I really needed the money. The black Benz was still behind me, and as I rounded the corner, so did the Benz. I was officially spooked, and took a few more corners, confusing my GPS, and when I realized I was being truly tailed, I called the client, and explained the situation. He told me to get to his place, and he would be there with the door open. He would let me stay until he was sure it was safe. He assured me this was something uncommon, but that it wasn't the first time he had heard about it, and he suspected it was a drug dealer who preyed upon new faces. I finally made it to his house, which seemed rather upkept compared to the rest of the neighborhood. I stepped out of the car, watching the bins slow on the same road. The client was there at the door with a gun of some sort in his hands. He held it in plain view and ushered me to come into his home. I was at that moment even more terrified, knowing I could be shot by him or kidnapped by the person in the bins. I was definitely starting to feel like I really needed a better job. But I rushed over to the client, going past him, seeing the husky cowering in the corner of the living room. Slowly, he shut the door, putting the weapon back into the hallway closet. "I do apologize. I've heard of these situations, but I really hoped it wouldn't happen. I'm Jonathan," he began. "I was a police officer for 10 years. Moved here last month, just until I can afford a better spot in the city. This girl here is Aurora." He held out his hand. I took it and shook it firmly. Firefly, I do apologize. It's the first time I've ever been followed like that." I was clearly shaken. Noticing how my fingers trembled, he gave me a smile. "Well, Firefly, let's go get you settled for a while. Feel free to stay here until you feel safe to go." I nodded, sitting on the couch and turning the TV to NCIS. "I won't be long, but I'm not sure I'm okay with coming this way again." He shrugged. "I can understand that after this. I could even bring Aurora to your house then. I wouldn't want anything to happen to you." I smiled gratefully. As it is, I don't know how I can get back safely. He thought for a while. "I'll escort you. I have some time before I go to work today. Just keep Aurora for a few hours." He handed me dog food, leashes, and some toys. "These'll keep her occupied. I'll be off around 5 and I'll pick her up, and I'll drop her off when I need her watched, so you're safer." I took everything into my arms. He readied Aurora and loaded her into my Ford. "Everything's ready." I nodded, climbing into my car as he got into his, and we proceeded back to my place. He had done just as he promised, even making sure I got to my door safely before driving away. I dog sit and dog walk for him twice a week now, and I've never had another issue. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eeriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at Dark Prevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.